Hey, what's up, guys, and welcome back to Cam's Retro Gaming. In this episode, I wanted to talk about my favorite, or I guess all the beat-em-ups I have for the Sega Genesis. And there's one bonus Sega CD beat-em-up as well. Like, I'm sure you guys can guess what that is. But just to kind of start out, I define a beat-em-up as a game where you're basically going from one side to the other. You are fighting enemies, and they take multiple hits. It's not like a one-hit kill kind of thing like Mario. And platforming is very light. So there are certain games I probably could have included in this, like Batman. But I felt like they had more platforming elements, that I wanted, that kind of qualified it as more of like a platformer, I guess. Although you can make arguments, I'm sure there are some gray areas in all of these games. You can kind of judge them based on other criteria. But anyway, we'll just get started with the first one right here, Alien Storm. This is actually pretty unique. This is an arcade port, and you have beat 'em up stages as well as kind of like shooting gallery stages, like the Punisher for Nintendo. That kind of, or Dynamite Duke for Sega Genesis, that kind of thing. So kind of a combo, but majority is kind of beat 'em up, although you do have weapons, but that's a cool one. All right, next we have Battletoads. Now you could make the argument that there is some platforming and other stuff in this game, but I think it's close enough as a beat 'em up that I'm happy to call it a beat 'em up. This is sort of known for the graphics not being really up to snuff for the Genesis, but it's a cool one to have for the collection, and man, that cover art is incredible. And going with the Battletoads theme, we have Battletoads and Double Dragon, sort of a combination of the two, and if I remember correctly, this has more of like a Battletoads feel, but with the Double Dragon characters as well. So I think it was probably made by the people that did Battletoads, most likely. Probably should have looked it up, but I'm just kind of going by what I remember. Next is another arcade port, Captain America and the Avengers. This is known for not being that great of a port, but I do love the subject matter. And I remember playing this in the arcade a whole bunch as a kid and renting this as well on the Genesis. So one of those you just have to have. Once again, amazing artwork. Next is a Comics Zone. This was one of those games that really showed off what the Genesis could do later on in its lifespan. Unfortunately, it is a very hard game, and I haven't put enough time into it to really get enough out of it, I guess. But I just remember this being advertised heavily about the time that the Sega Nomad came out, but just a really incredible, unique style. So, but yeah, I remember this being very hard. Next is a Dick Tracy, another early game. This one is also known for segments where you kind of like control the gun, sort of like NAM 1975. On the Neo Geo, but also sort of going left to right, beating people up. But who remembers the Dick Tracy movie that all of a sudden overtook the early 90s? And they had a whole bunch of like Dick Tracy stuff in McDonald's, I remember, like cars, I think. Golden Axe, we'll do both of these. I just grabbed these off the shelf in order. Golden Axe 1 is one of the finest beat 'em ups on the Genesis and in the arcade. Absolutely love this game, and I believe the Genesis version has an extra stage. So yeah, I mean, this is just an absolute classic game. Great difficulty curve, and man, so fun with two players. Golden Axe 2, not quite as good, still great. Prefer number 1, but I also did enjoy 2. I mean, they're both awesome games. So, but these are, especially 1, absolute must-have for the Genesis. Next is Growl. Now, look at this absolutely crazy album artwork. I'm sorry, album artwork, game artwork. And this is an arcade port, kind of an obscure game. I remember playing this at a buddy's house. He was an arcade collector, my buddy Dan. Shout out to Lost Ark Video Games in Greensboro, North Carolina. But this one was kind of tough to track down. I think I got it off of Amazon of all places. But you got the Indiana Jones ripoff. This one's cool because you're basically saving animals. And I'm a huge animal fan, so that kind of hits home with me. Not the best port, but it's pretty cool. So if you're a beat 'em up fan, it's, you know, something to look out for. Now the Incredible Hulk, I guess this is a beat 'em up. Not a good one, unfortunately. You'd think so. It's just the incredible art. I mean, I think this is like a lost art form, pun intended. But absolutely average game. They had a thing in the, I guess, you know, it was very common for them to underpower superheroes, and this is no exception. All right, another sort of average one. I haven't played this a whole lot. I rented this as a kid, but Maximum Carnage, back when Carnage was like the biggest deal in the 90s, I remember. But, you know, unfortunately the Spider-Man games, they were acclaimed and they just didn't do as well as, or didn't play as well as you would have hoped. This one is MA13, I guess. Interesting. Here's another obscure one, Mazen Saga Mutant Fighter. You know, this is one of those games I played when I first got it, but I haven't played it a whole lot since, and that was, you know, pre-pandemic. But if I remember correctly, this has some pretty cool artwork, and I want to say that you fight, like the final bosses is almost like a one-on-one sort of Street Fighter or, you know, fighting game sort of style. If I'm wrong, I feel like an idiot, but cool artwork. Unfortunately, I need the manual for this one. Oh, I do have the manual. Never mind. Must have been something else, but this might be, yeah, it probably is. Mutant Fighter puts fighting back where it belongs in the streets. We'll count this as a beat 'em up. Okay, arcade. This isn't a straight port, but this is based on the arcade game. And I do call this a beat 'em up, although you are Michael Jackson and you are dancing, and you do cause enemies to dance and dance off the screen, if I remember. So notorious for it being Michael Jackson, sort of a tarnished legacy, but a beat 'em up nonetheless. Okay, Mystical Fighter. This kind of reminds me of the Mazen Saga Mutant Fighter. I think this is the one I don't have the manual for. Yeah. So I remember this having really cool artwork, kind of traditional, sort of, you know, I guess those are kabukis. But cool game, pretty obscure, worth checking out though if you're a beat 'em up fan. And next we have Paprium, which is the only sort of homebrew or modern beat 'em up I have in here. This one was known for having a very long development time and hard to get. I think they probably go for a pretty penny now. But once again, a shout out to my buddy Dan from Lost Ark Video Games. He saved one for me, knowing how big of a Genesis fan I am. And this is one of those games that it absolutely pushes the graphics of the Genesis. It probably has some special chips and does some fancy things. It's cool if you have I think if you have a 32X or Sega CD hooked up, the game utilizes the processor to control like the AI sort of second player. So some really cool stuff with this one. And one that you should check out however you can, because it's a good one. All right. Pirates of Dark Water, a obscure cartoon. This, you know what? This may have been more of a side scroller, platformer, and the Super Nintendo one might have been more the beat 'em up. I have both, so I may have mixed them up, but we're including this just in case. But this is probably more of a platformer. And in that sort of style. Unfortunately, this was a former rental and they cut the insert, but cool to have. Speaking of The Punisher, who I mentioned before, this is The Punisher. So this is based off the arcade game. Not nearly as good, but still worth getting. And you get to, if you're have a 2-player, you get to use boy, why can't I think of his name? Nick Fury. I bought this, my original copy. This is not it, but I bought my original copy from Blockbuster for really cheap. Of course, this is a rare game now. And do I have the manual? I do. Okay, cool. This is also a former rental. I'll let you know how I love those. So Punisher. All right, we're getting to the S's. A few really good ones in the S category. So this is Splatterhouse 3. This sort of broke away from the Splatterhouse formula, which was very unique. You could probably call it a beat 'em up in a way, but it's almost like a survival beat 'em up. Very tough games, but this is definitely a beat 'em up with some unique elements to it, and worth checking out. I do remember the cool digitized graphics. There are some really cool cutscenes in this game, but a very hard game and a lot of sort of multiple paths going on, and just great artwork as always. So Splatterhouse 3. Now we're getting to some of the, arguably the best beat 'em ups on the Genesis. Streets of Rage 1. Now, I may be mistaken, but I want to say this was sort of made to compete with like the likes of Final Fight. And I think it succeeded. Really, really fun game. I believe this was a pack-in some of the Genesis consoles. I remember seeing this at like Sam's Club when I was a kid, packed in with the Genesis. Actually, my first memories of, I think, playing Genesis was at, I think it was Sam's Club, and they had a kiosk, and I think it was Altered Beast. Same thing with Mario World for Super Nintendo. Cool memories, but fine beat 'em up. And probably the best beat 'em up on the Genesis, or most people would probably say so. It's Streets of Rage 2. Everything about the first one, but taken up a notch. More playable characters, I believe. 2 players, and man, great music on this one. Really unique soundtrack, kind of like a dance soundtrack with its own spin. But a must-have. If you don't have Streets of Rage 2 for the Genesis, what are you even doing? All right, speaking of Streets of Rage, we have Streets of Rage 3. This one is notorious for being very difficult, and I believe they made this more difficult for the U.S. market, maybe even the European market. I played this first at my cousin's house, and he told me that you can, if you beat up the trainer, you can play as Roo, the kangaroo, and he was right. I'll never forget that. So when I get to that spot, I always beat the trainer's ass so I can play as Roo. So Streets of Rage 3, difficult, but worth having, I would say. All right, probably the other best beat 'em up, if there can be 2 best. Turtles, the Hyperstone Heist. Some people like this even better than Turtles in Time, which is a fine beat 'em up for the Super Nintendo. Absolutely a must-have. Really fun game, and just very varied, but lots of variation in the levels. You know, you're going in time, obviously. I think you're going in time in this one too, or at least lots of different stages. There's like a pirate ship, really cool. You know, I might be mixing up this game with Turtles in Time, but whatever. You know what? It's a great game anyway, so check it out. Hyperstone Heist. We're getting to the end, and unfortunately, we have hit sort of a lower point, but Two Crude Dudes. This also has some kind of platforming-ish elements, but a Data East game, and you know Data East and their beat-em-ups. This was a beautiful rental special. I mean, look at that. Worth checking out if you've exhausted your other beat-em-ups on the Genesis. And here we have Venom, Spider-Man, and Separation Anxiety with Carnage and a symbiote back there. I forgot her name. Screech or something? Not Screech Powers. Another really hard game by Acclaim. Not the best, but Spider-Man was super hot in the 90s, and why not? You know, I probably could have included the X-Men games, but they do have a lot of platforming. Maybe it was X-Men 2. Was it the Clone Wars? I could probably include it in that too, but we're not going to. So I did mention it though. Anyway, Spider-Man, Separation Anxiety. And last but not least, we have Final Fight CD for the Sega CD. Absolute classic game and must-have for the Sega CD. Classic beat 'em up. Absolutely something to check out if you have one of these. So anyway, guys, thanks for watching. My wife's coming down to do laundry, so we'll check you next time.